Hello, in this lesson, we are going to be looking at something that many students panic about, and that is writing effective introductions and conclusions that are going to wow your teachers and examiners. So, our objectives for this session are that we're going to understand the importance of strong introductions and conclusions in shaping an essay. They are really important. Students ask all the time whether you need them. The answer is yes, if you are aiming for those top grades. We are going to learn how to write an effective introduction that presents a clear argument, your thesis, and explore how to craft a conclusion that reinforces your argument and leaves a lasting impression on the reader, be that your teacher or the examiner. So, welcome to today's session where we are focusing on crafting effective introductions and conclusions. And by the end of this lesson, you will know how to write introductions that set up that strong argument and conclusions that leave the reader with a sense of closure and reflection. So, the importance of them, first of all, I mentioned that they're important, but you might be thinking, well, why are they important? Can't I just get on with my essay? Well, introductions and conclusions are critical for making a good impression on the examiner or your teacher and setting out your overall ideas. A strong introduction gives your essay a direction, that conceptualized thread that we have talked about in other sessions, while a powerful conclusion ties everything together and reinforces the argument you outlined in your introduction. It sort of bookends your essay. So, your introduction presents the thesis and outlines the essay's big ideas, and your conclusion summarizes key points, reflects on the argument, and offers a final thought. And as a grade 8 or grade 9 tip, think of your introduction as a roadmap and your conclusion as a chance to show the depth of your understanding. Both should link to the big picture of the text and its themes. And note how I've put in bold there, big picture, because we are always looking at the big picture and not just the surface interpretation. So, writing a strong introduction, an introduction should do three key things. First of all, it needs to address the question, obviously. So look at the command word of the question. And this is particularly useful for the extract questions where you are given an extract and it's considered a rubric infringement if you do not reference the extract in some way. Now, if you talk about it in the introduction and link it to the key themes and link that extract to the key themes and to the focus of the question, you ensure that you do not miss out on talking about the extract. Even if you don't talk about the extract anywhere else in your essay, you will ensure that you have not committed a rubric infringement, which is to go against the rules of the exam. So make sure you directly engage with the essay question, which will link to that extract. Second, present a clear thesis. So state your argument clearly and concisely, your big idea about that theme or character. What was the writer trying to achieve? And outline your key ideas. So give a brief overview of the points you will cover in your essay. So as an example, how does Shakespeare present ambition in Macbeth? So in Macbeth, Shakespeare explores the destructive nature of unchecked ambition through the character of Macbeth, whose pursuit of power leads him to moral corruption and eventual downfall. Through Macbeth's inner conflict, Lady Macbeth's influence, and the tragic consequences of their actions, there I am mentioning the key things I'm going to discuss in my essay. Shakespeare critiques the dangers of overreaching ambition. And as a key tip for grade 8 or grade 9 students or those aiming for those grades, keep your introduction focused and concise. Avoid retelling the plot. Instead, focus on your thesis and give a clear sense of direction for your essay. So, addressing the question, the first step in writing a strong introduction is to directly address the question. Use the wording of the question and don't be afraid to repeat those command words of the question. I know we tell you not to repeat things, but in the case of the command words of the question, do not worry about trying to conjure up synonyms and panicking, oh, I'm repeating myself all the time. You can just repeat that word. There is no harm in doing that whatsoever. And this shows that you are responding to it specifically. As an example, the question could be, how is the theme of social responsibility explored in Inspector Calls? And your introduction might run something like this. It's not a full example, but just might give you an idea of how you're going to address that question. In Inspector Calls, Priestley explores the theme of responsibility by highlighting the interconnectedness of individuals within society. Through the character of the inspector, Priestley critiques the self-centered attitude of the upper classes and encourages a collective sense of moral duty. So I've addressed the question, I've talked about Priestley's intentions, and I've also linked to a little bit of context there as well. So I've achieved all of those things I want to achieve within an effective introduction. So as a grade 8 or grade 9 tip, use the language of the question in your thesis to make it clear that you're directly engaging with the prompt and consider the bigger ideas at play with regard to the theme or character the question asks you to focus on. So crafting a clear thesis. So your thesis is the central argument of your essay and it should be clear, focused, and answer the question directly. A strong thesis sets the tone for your entire essay and lets the reader know exactly where you stand. So as an example, instead of saying Shakespeare shows ambition in Macbeth, very, very boring, very flat, doesn't really say anything meaningful. Say Shakespeare portrays ambition as a corrupting force that eventually, ultimately leads to moral decay and destruction. And as a grade 8 or grade 9 tip, avoid vague or general statements like the one I just gave. Your thesis should be specific and show a clear line of argument that you will develop throughout your essay. That is your conceptualized response, that thread that runs throughout your essay. And considering writer's intentions, I know I've already mentioned this and I go on about this all the time, but it is so important. After presenting your thesis, briefly outline why you think the writer has included this character or theme. Ask yourself, what is their function or role in the text? You can also include any broad relevant context, but don't include too much or extraneous biographical detail. So just random facts about Shakespeare or random facts about King James I in the case of Macbeth. So as an example, Shakespeare's presentation of Macbeth's ambition through his internal conflict, Lady Macbeth's manipulation, and the tragic consequences that result from their pursuit of power all serve to highlight the destructive nature of ambition. They have been used by Shakespeare as a cautionary tale for the contemporary audience, warning them of the ramifications of contravening, so going against the divine right of kings. So as a grade 8 or grade 9 tip, be succinct, so be to the point when outlining your key idea. Don't give too much detail in the introduction, save that for the body of the essay, but always be asking yourself, what is the writer's wider message here? So writing a strong conclusion. So a conclusion should do three things. 1, summarize your key points, briefly restate the arguments of your essay. 2, reflect on your thesis, show how the evidence you presented supports your central argument. And 3, offer a final thought, and with a reflection or broader comment that leaves the reader thinking and an evaluation of whether the writer has achieved their purpose. So for example, ultimately, Shakespeare's Macbeth illustrates how ambition, when unchecked, can lead to self-destruction. Through the tragic downfall of Macbeth, Shakespeare warns against the dangers of overreaching for power and the moral consequences that come with it. And as a grade 8 or 9 tip, avoid ending with in conclusion because it's boring. We see it time and time again. Use powerful, assertive phrases like irrefutably, undeniably, without question. You are presenting your line of argument, and avoid, I think, in your introduction or conclusion. I know that you're saying, well, they are my ideas, but we know they're your ideas because your name is at the top of the paper. Also, focus on reinforcing your thesis and giving the examiner a sense of closure. So offering a final thought then, so a strong conclusion doesn't just summarize, it leaves the reader with a final thought or reflection. This could be a comment on the writer's intentions, the relevance of the themes today, or the impact of the text as a whole. So as an example, Shakespeare's portrayal of ambition in Macbeth serves as a timeless warning about the perils of unchecked desire for power, a theme that continues to resonate in today's political landscape. As a grade 8 or grade 9 tip, use your conclusion to show the wider significance of the text. This will leave the examiner with a lasting impression of your analysis, so that wider significance, what the writer's message is, what they are trying to achieve through their text. You've outlined that in your introduction, come back to it. You're coming full circle, you're going back to that in your conclusion. So an example introduction then, just to reinforce this. In An Inspector Calls, Priestley explores the theme of social responsibility by highlighting the moral consequences of individual actions. Through the character of the inspector, Priestley critiques the selfish attitudes of the upper classes and emphasizes the importance of collective responsibility, and forced the post-World War I and World War II audiences to reflect on their own behavior and role in the oppression of the working class. And then an example conclusion. Irrefutably, so undeniably, Priestley's An Inspector Calls ultimately serves as a call to action, urging the audience to reconsider their own social responsibility. By presenting the failures of characters like Mr. Burling and the moral awakening of Sheila, Priestley advocates for a more compassionate and socially aware society. The play's message remains as relevant today as it was in 1945, reminding us that individual actions have far-reaching impact on the world around us. So you'll note that in that conclusion there, I have referenced back to things that I would have talked about in my main body paragraphs, such as the moral awakening of Sheila and the failures of characters like Mr. Burley. So a grade 8 or grade 9 tip: ensure that your conclusion echoes your introduction, but does not simply restate it. Use the conclusion to reinforce your arguments and add depth to your analysis. So some common pitfalls: introducing new arguments. Don't bring in new points or evidence in the conclusion. Being too vague. Avoid general or broad statements in your introduction or conclusion. Focus on specific points that link to the question. And restating the introduction and your conclusion. I know I mentioned this before, but while the introduction and conclusion should be related, the conclusion builds on your analysis on your main body paragraphs and does not just repeat the introduction. And then as a grade 8 or grade 9 tip, make sure your introduction and conclusion are balanced. The introduction should set up your argument and the conclusion should reflect on the significance of that argument. And some final thoughts for you: introductions and conclusions frame your essay. As I said right at the beginning, they should be clear, focused, and reinforce your argument. Always take time to craft a thoughtful introduction and a reflective conclusion. These are the first and last impressions you will leave on the examiner or your teacher. And as a little bit of homework, some next steps for you to try yourself: write an introduction and conclusion for the following question, or any text that you have studied, really. But if you've studied Macbeth, how does Shakespeare present the theme of guilt in Macbeth? But you can substitute that theme and that text for anything that you have studied. So that brings us to the end of this lesson. If you have found it useful, be sure to check out the other free lessons, and do check out the website as well. There are other free lessons and resources on there, as well as hundreds of other lessons and resources to really push you to the top of the mark scheme. And don't forget to follow us on social media.